Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of UX Banter Podcast. This podcast is presented by Galaxy UX Studio and powered by Galaxy Weblinks. Vasudev Kutumbakam is a phrase in Sanskrit that means the world is one family. Our guest of today's episode is a firm believer of the same. He co-founded ADPList with a vision to inspire powerful conversations and collaborations among members of the design community worldwide, to change the world together with creativity. He is an engineer, ex-army man, design lead, and an entrepreneur who believes in constantly reinventing the way we experience and communicate with the world. Please welcome the co-founder of ADPList, Mr. Felix Lee.
Thank you so much, Dushan, for having me here.
It's a pleasure, sir, to having you on board. And I was really apprehensive about whether or not to first approach you, and then whether you will join us. And I can just tell you that how happy I am to just having this face-to-face conversation with you.
Thank you.
I believe this goes on to the roots of the entire mentorship platform. I mean, that is the purpose of it, right? That you get to speak with people who are leaders in the industry and getting the opportunity to be able to speak with one another.
Yep. I think it's exciting to be able to do this on a day-to-day basis these days.
So if we start the conversation, your short to fame is ADPList, the way that it has become the biggest of the community brands in the design industry. So what is the story behind ADPList?
I think, when we think about ADPList, it was really started during the pandemic where, people were getting laid off from jobs and, people were just looking for jobs. And, we started off as a very humble Google Excel spreadsheet online, right? Where, you just put your names inside and that's it. And we started with barely 30 mentors, barely 200 mentees about a year ago. And it was mainly in Singapore and the US, where I'm based at. But today, truly, it has grown so global. Today, ADPList is on a mission to democratize mentorship and to bring mentorship access to the world. With over 6,000 mentors from 90 different countries.
Wow.
And so many mentees. So many mentees from everywhere, from US to Canada to India, which is our second largest community. I'm truly excited that the story has evolved itself from just wanting to help people to really truly connecting people to share knowledge with each other. I think it's an incredible adventure that we're all going on together with mentors like yourself and everyone that is just watching this thing unfold is just truly magical.
Absolutely. And one of the things or anecdote that I always think about whenever I think about ADPList is, so far India has been in the soft power for quite some time. I mean, we do develop a lot of software and the engineers come out, but the designers in India, they never actually get their due, because design generally happens either in Silicon Valley, and then we just have to follow the everything that has been used there. Because for UX to happen, you have to have the users present there, and since the target markets are generally US or UK or generally West in general, so having to have that practice run or the seat at the table, if you say, was quite hard to get by. And with ADPList getting that opportunity to connect with the world and saying that we are not just the followers, but we do understand the community. As people started to communicate with the designers across the world, it turns out that we are not far off. We are in the same boat, basically.
Yep, 100%. Like when you think about the world in totality, we're so much alike than we are different. In the things we do, in the way we do things, in the way we speak. And the reason why ADPList is so global today is because like I'm from Singapore, I'm now in the US, and you're in India. Like we're able to communicate. There's no barrier at all, essentially. And we have been fortunate to make that happen on such a global scale. You're able to see that it transcends culture, transcends background, transcends language, transcends what you do. And I think it's truly, truly a community by itself.
Great. So I'm going to ask one question that not many are aware that you were in the army, that I started the conversation, or in the introduction I said. So from an army man to a designer, and from a designer to a successful entrepreneur with this startup. I mean, how the journey has been. I mean, it's like 360 transformation from where somebody started and where somebody is. So how is that? How does that feel? What is the view from the top?
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm still a little bit of way to the top, and I'm working my best every day. One of the things that in the army, I enlisted into the army in the late of 2018. So after my high school days, I went to the army for 2 years. I spent my time there, and back then I think I was 20 years old, and so it was incredible, coming from a background where you are just, trying to create things, and then now in the army, it's a totally shift of environment for me, as you imagine, because in the army you have to follow rules, you have to follow strict routines, you have to be disciplined, you have to be taking care of your friends, so on and so forth. And in army, I went through a lot of tough things. I was a very different, I was a very different individual in the army, and what I meant was that a lot of people in the army, after the army they wanted to go study college, so on and so forth. And for me, I just wanted to do amazing things. I just wanted to be able to do some amazing work for the world. I didn't care much about sort of like those social requirements in a sense. And so for me, I had a tough time in the army because I was so different from everyone else, and I spent my weekends working on side projects while people go for parties, and obviously during the days, on the weekdays, you spend your time training in the army. I think it taught me a lot about discipline. It taught me a lot about self-management, time management. When it's extremely rough, when you have 5 days of training, and then you have the weekends to yourself, and you got to ask yourself, what do I want to do on this weekend? And for me, in the 2 years of army, I only had one very focused goal, was that I wanted to be the best designer that I could be in these 2 years. So every weekend, I was going to go out there, I was going to talk to people, I was going to get mentored by people, I was going to learn how to design even more, I was going to work on projects. I was so focused these 2 years on just getting my design skills, my design sense up. And it was incredible because I was able to do that, and I got jobs, and thereafter I was sort of like invited to join a startup, as one of their founding designers. So for me, it was an incredible journey. We met 2 years into the founding designer of GoTrade. Today they are like the Robin Hood of Southeast Asia, right? And I left that company and I started ADPList. So I would say that it's been quite a sort of like fascinating journey coming from a totally different background to being a founder. I think that's actually what makes me human. That's what makes me, I think, so different, is just the world that I've seen on the other side. Yeah.
Absolutely, because life experiences are combined together when we are putting into action. That is something that brings the character of people. Whenever we go through some different experiences which are quite different from the other side of the angle, they are definitely going to work out. So when we say that journey path, I mean, it wasn't, I don't think that you just woke up one morning and said, I want to do this thing and that thing. So of course there must be somebody mentoring you in those days, or up till this path. Do you think that you had good mentors who actually guided you to the path?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of my mentors are very indirect, to sort of like inspire me. They are very indirect. I look at, people like, let's say Steve Jobs, right? Like, he's one of my earliest, I think a lot of people use Steve Jobs, but I'm still going to use it anyway because it's the true story that, I was so deeply inspired by the way he looked at the world. And, I think Steve was one of them. And then we look at things like, things like how Apple is being built today as a company. it's just on a whole new on a different level. So for me, Steve was such an inspiration to me because of the way he lived his life. The other sort of like the other sort of like inspiration that I have is actually the founding Prime Minister of Singapore. I'm not sure if you know him. His name is Lee Kuan Yew. He founded Singapore in 1965, and back then Singapore is like think of it like a tier 3 village in India. It's like that's all you have, and he saw and he led the development of Singapore from a small startup, that being said, like a small startup, to a huge country that represents so many ASEAN countries around the world today. And he did it in one lifetime. And
Absolutely.
and you would struggle to find anyone who has founded a country, not a company, but a country, and be able to see a country thrive in your lifetime is
True.
extremely rare. And so for me, that was done within 50 years, less than that probably. And from a third world to the thriving first world today, it was done less than 30 years. And for me, it was like that represented a very significant sort of like leadership qualities, vision, like a visionary, that I think I extremely admire. It's if people don't know him, they should go and read it, because it's I think Singaporeans like myself, like, we know that he's smart, we know that he's extremely great, but I think that we don't understand exactly how great is this greatness, because it's unthinkable sometimes.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
rare. Yeah. So yeah, these two are my greatest inspiration.
That's true. Political willpower actually is required to make the change if you want to. Otherwise, you can just, leave the country as it is and you can go years and nothing happens. And those things are true. I mean, it's great to have those mindset of change to bring the better of the community, the bring the betterment of the country or the field that you are working with. They have to be achieved with constant persistent that actually follows one individual. So one question which I have, which is, I don't think that if anybody has asked you. So we do understand that what was the idea, how ADP list was supposed to form the way it is. Are there any surprises along the way that you discovered that, oh, this thing I didn't expect to happen, but it has happened? It's a happy surprise. So are there any things for you that, really surprising in the end?
I think the surprises that comes along the way is truly how fundamentally good majority of the human being can be. And in fact, most human beings can actually be. When you think about, mentors like yourself, who is willing to, set up 30 minutes time each week to meet people, you deserve to call yourself a mentor, because you're willing to have 30 minutes. I mean, 30 minutes is not a lot per week, and you're willing to have that 30 minutes with someone. And I think that is something that I wouldn't say surprises me. I would say like it truly showed me like how big this can be. And it is not just happening in India, right? It's not just happening in Singapore. It is happening in the US as well, where you have mentors like that, and it's incredible to watch it unfold. That's one of the things that surprises me in a way. The other one, I think it's how it relates to the first one, is how ready people are to contribute to a mission that is bigger than themselves. ADPList wouldn't be here today without the earliest people who had believed in us and wanted to continue and want to continue to help us. And some of them do it on a voluntary basis. They do it on a voluntary basis. And for me, you kind of got to be extremely grateful for that. It's done out of their time and out of their goodwill, and they want to be able to pay it forward to community. So that's something that I never expect, because in Singapore, whenever you do something, you expect to be paid. You as well. So I think when people come in here and say, "Hey Felix, can I volunteer to be a designer for you? Can I volunteer to be a sort of like programmer?" You see like, wow, this is something different. So I think that's very refreshing. I think these are that surprises me. The rest, I think, are just lessons that I have to learn, along the way. So there are no big surprises just yet. But I think humans are always
Uh,
surprising each other. Yeah.
Good. So trust humans and you will get the best out of them. The humanity is there. So let me tell you just one small anecdote about,
Yeah.
when I joined ADPList, the idea was that I will share some ideas if I can mentor people. And I started getting bookings in the first weeks, and it was going okay, because I think when you do first couple of sessions, you realize that most of these questions are common. The format generally, well, not always, but there is a format to it. There is a pattern in which people have those troubles and questions. So I finally compiled a document and I share it with each of my mentees, that here are the things you should follow, as a common share that I give it to them, because generally they come for portfolio reviews, CV reviews, and all that. So I was having this conversation with my boss about that, how do we grow the studio that we have. So as a part of Galaxy Web Links, we said we need to set up an entire UX design studio and how to grow. And I'm like, I have no idea, because this is something that I haven't done, and in India this is a big deal to set up an entire auxiliary unit. So I
Yep.
said, wait a second, I know somebody might come to help. So I went to ADPList and became a mentee
Yep.
there, and I booked couple of people. And surprisingly, when they actually started talking about what the brand of a studio should be, how what are the characteristics that you should follow, and if you can just set the vision, tell everybody what you're doing, and then get on with it, and you should have a mission and a vision and all that. I said, I knew all that, but why did I try it ever? So I did that. After a couple of months, then I went back to the same mentors, and I thanked them. And then they said that your goals are still very audacious, hairy goals, the big goals that you have made. Now there are the four things that you can do to even get even better. And to tell you the truth, I started with 20 people at the beginning of COVID, when the team was, and now the team is about 70 professionals. And the way the whole thing has turned out is just mind blowing. I mean, just getting the idea. And here is a success story that I can tell you, and that is why the one of the reasons that we are really excited that this conversation having with you means a lot to me personally.
Yeah.
Okay, with that, I have some fun questions to ask.
Go for it. Yeah, I'm all ready for that.
Okay, so in our UX Banter podcast, here's the first question for you, which is your favorite holiday destination.
Wow. Thailand.
Thailand. Okay.
Thailand. Yeah.
One person, dead or alive, you would like to grab a drink with.
Uh, Lee Kuan Yew. Yeah.
Okay. Favorite TV show of all time.
Oh man, this is tough. I would say it's Pokemon. Yeah.
Great
That's,
answer.
that is a classic. I love Pokemon. So yeah.
I would have said Doraemon or Shin-chan.
Or the Japanese film. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, but to think about it, DuckTales would have been in the zone somewhere. Okay.
Exactly.
So one day in your life you would like to relive.
Oh. I want to. Oh, this is a good question. I want to relive the day where I was, I represented Singapore to compete internationally for sports. So I was in the speed skating. Sort of like a team for Team Singapore. So I represented Singapore for sports as
Nice.
well. Yeah.
So this is another aspect of you that we didn't know, and
This is another aspect. Yeah. So I would want to stand at the starting line again. I think
Great.
that adrenaline when you feel the crowd, the starting line, and the judges calling your name, and when you're about to compete for your country, I think that is irreplaceable. So I want to do that again.
Ladies and gentlemen, please note that Mr. Felix Lee has another side of him, which is an international sports person. And
Yeah.
that should come to as no surprise that with all the things that he has achieved, the only thing which is remaining is if he has starred in any movies. He's in US, so Hollywood, watch out. Another
Hollywood should watch out. Yes.
on the flight, would you prefer to sit on the
Yeah.
window
Window
side
out.
or
Oh no! I would say, oh man, this is a freaking tough one. I would say, if I was younger, I would say window, but for now, I would say else for the sake of convenience.
Okay. And one book that you really, like, which has big influence on you.
I think there is this book that I always immediately thought of. Is called To Pixar and Beyond. It's about the first CFO of Pixar writing his experience about the early days of Pixar, working with Steve Jobs and the Pixar team as well. It's extremely sort of like different and a humbling perspective. Just learning about how Pixar it's came to be. So I think that's the part where I think that's the book that I think everyone should read. Highly recommend it.
Nice one. To Pixar and Beyond. That's
Yep.
I'll definitely order it as soon after this one, and should try and
sure.
cover in the coming podcasts.
Yes.
So what is your favorite phone app?
My favorite phone app these days seems to be the Notes, because because every time I have a conversation with someone, I would somehow find inspiration out of the conversation and I would write it in my notes. So I think Notes is a good one.
Books or movies?
Movies.
Okay, and the last question for this section is that if you were a superhero, what would your superpower be?
I've never thought of that actually. I think I would say that time travel, I think, would be a good one. Time travel. So you'll be able to travel.
In the past or in the future?
I think traveling back to the past is kind of my thing. Not because I want to think about the past, but I think it's fascinating to understand how and why things come to be, and then you understand that. And I think there's always a quote that goes that history always repeats itself. And if you don't understand history, you don't understand the future. So for me, I think history is always extremely important.
So in one of your articles about the UX fallacy, you mentioned something that I can quote, which is, it's not all design. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, 100% is not all design. I think, I think the fallacy of UX is that people tend to think that it solves problem through good experience and usability. I think, and I think that's a problem, right? We have a lot of people who can do the work, but not a lot of people who can think, and it's a rare commodity these days. You always kind of got to start from the problem to work backwards and working into the experience and then the technology. I think sometimes people have that mixed up. Some people start from the technology and they think like, I want to do blockchain, then I work backwards from there. But it's not. You got to start from the problem. And for me, the reason why I say design doesn't solve everything in a way is because if you don't understand the most fundamental problem about what you're solving, essentially it's just going to be a design. If you look at the first version of ADPList, is the best example of this statement. We started as an Excel spreadsheet, right? It's a Google spreadsheet. What design is there? There's no design. There's no typical UI design or whatever. It's not that design. But it solves the problem, and we understood the problem that it was solving. And so for me is that design is much more about understanding the world in many different complexities as compared to just trying to design like an app or something. I think that's the beautiful part about design. And I often say that I don't just design like UI, UX or whatever. Like sometimes I would design home, sometimes I would design sofa. I would draw and I would design certain things because all these are the part of design. You're solving a problem. So I think design in itself is not so much about what you think it is, but rather what problem are you actually trying to solve. That is so valuable. Sometimes it doesn't even require design.
Right. Extremely well put. I mean, this is something which is going to be the takeaway from this session. Anybody who is going to listen to this podcast, I think this is where we hit the meat, actually.
Oh, awesome.
You are all for data-driven designs. That is something that you're all for that. So can you just tell us the importance that how does it plays the bigger role in coming up with the end solution?
Yeah, I think as a lot of designers that I've met, kind of like to think that you know, design and, let's say, um, uh, design and data or design and business is two different things. Or some people like to think that, oh, if I'm serving my users, I cannot benefit the business, or if I benefit the business, I cannot benefit the users. I think it's a flawed thinking. You're hired by the business to design for the business. The moment you start thinking that, oh, like, everything is like just for the users, I think that's one of the common traps that I think people fall into, which is wishful thinking, right? People like to fall into that trap, like what Elon Musk has said, and I think it's really true in that way, because when you think about data itself, it actually gives you the direction of where your design can be. One of the things is that a lot of designers, they don't like working with data. I say that the best designers spend 70 to 80% of their time on data, and then they design the rest of the 20 to 30%. The reason why I say that is because they look at the data and they say, okay, the company goal is to maybe get more users to check out something, like check out on the e-commerce store. Now, it seems like the users are not checking out as much. What is the reason? I look at the data and I see, okay, it's not checking out as much. And I see that the data shows that there is a part of the user flow that is broken.
Right.
Or like people are dropping off specifically. And so then that data guides me to go and talk to the users and say, hey, I saw that there's I look at the data and whatever, but you don't tell them, and you say, oh, what's happening here, right? And you're trying to understand, and then you design for an improvement and iteration for that. Then you launch out the product again. And if you look at this very simple example, first of all, you're benefiting the business, right? Second of all, you're going to benefit the users because they are stuck at some point of the process. You're helping them make it easier. Now, and if you think about the whole process that I just talked about, it didn't start off with like, I want to design something. It started off with data. It started off with simply looking at the data. And my point is that, there's so many designers that don't start there. They start somewhere in the way back bottom end of that. And then after that, when they design, then they look at the data, which is not the way that you want to do it. You should let data first give you some signs and hints about what's going on, and then
Right.
you talk to your users, and then you design for something. Design is always the last thing. So I spend so many time just looking at Excel sheets and talking to people, just because it's it guides you to the way you want to build a certain product.
So in general, if you think about it, what you said makes total sense. If you just put it with, if I have to put another pain to it, that is like designer's role from the point when we were asked to design a mock-up or something. It has changed completely. We come to the design at the very end, but looking at the data and the requirement, the business analysis side of it, understanding what the screen is actually doing, and when you are clicking on something, what happens before the use cases, everything has to be understood
Yep.
before anybody touches the computer. So that has actually added a lot of responsibility on anybody who is sitting in the designer's chair. A lot of context awareness is required. A lot of understanding of the business side is also needed. We can't just blindly walk into the room and say, yeah, here is a design, just like it or not. But that also benefits us in another context, that now we can say that the seat at the table is not that high. We can actually claim that we are here to stay. Last question, and before we are going to call it a show, which is about diversity. You are uh, in San Francisco right now.
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco right now. Yes.
Okay, so in San Francisco, there is a lot of diversity in the mix as well. There is very happening Chinatown. I love that place. And also there are companies where male, female, black, they all come together to do this amazing innovative software designing and development and all the other creative industry are based out of it. So the same thing is with ADP list. You have like what 60% female staff, 40% of other, the individuals which are there. And I think it is important to have a company that's sort of an outlook when they're actually growing. So in terms of user experience design, how much of an exposure, as you were talking about in the beginning, that because of the military you got a different perspective to things, how much diversity plays a bigger role in you being the best designer out there, or your agency or company leveraging that responsibility and inclusiveness to become better?
Yeah, for sure. I think we when we think about when we think about sort of like diversity, I think diversity is something that I was actually quite confused in the earliest days of my career. If I'll be honest with you, I was thinking like, why the need to have like diversity when you can just hire the best people. The best people sometimes is not diverse, right? I mean, sometimes it might be just all Chinese,
True.
sometimes it might be all Indian, sometimes it might be all American, so on and so forth. And then later, then I realized that when you want a diversity, it's not much of like just getting the best people, but being intentional about, first of all, opportunities that are given. Second of all is about the perspective that you bring inside. Today, ADPList is so global because our team is so global. You have people in the US, you have folks in India. I'd love to invite some of you, all of you, in fact, to our India meetup very soon. Like we are throwing an event in India, but I'll tell you more about that. But like diversity from India, US, Singapore, Australia, so on and so forth, into ADP's Africa as well.
Mhm.
When you get that, you don't just get a diversity of like cultures and so on and so forth, and like genders as well, but you get a diversity of perspective. And I think that it's always healthy to have that perspective challenged, and you say that, hey, look, I think we should do it this way, and someone comes in and said, no, I don't think we should do it this way, maybe we can do it the other way. Or someone comes in and said, yeah, I agree with you, I think we should do it this way. And it's powerful because if your views can actually transcend and convince a very broad perspective of group of people, it's very likely that your product is able to serve the world. And for me, I felt like that is a good representation of ADPList today. Is that because it's so diverse, you're able to serve people of so many different backgrounds.
That's great to hear. And I'm all for the inclusiveness, the way that you've explained to it. Again, it goes back to the point that having different life perspectives, understanding the problem from a different angle, different set of glasses, that you can actually now judge the problem because somebody is representing in the same room. And if we give the seat at the table, that is the inclusive design. In the end, whatever you are creating, it has included, it not just benefits the individuals but the businesses as well. I mean, in India there was a great mistrust about e-commerce products at the beginning of time. So it turned out that they decided that how do people do mail order here, and there is a thing called VPP, on which you can order something in postal service. So the order would come and you need to get that parcel, you need to pay to the post office, and you get the parcel. So what Indian e-commerce back in the day in 2002 and 3 they started off was a thing called cash on delivery,
Yep.
or COD in short. And whenever I tried to explain people in UK or US, they didn't understand what cash on delivery model was. And trust me, to this day, when Amazon decided to come to India about 5-6 years ago, and they have to adopt to that model now. Imagine ordering something on Amazon and delivering only when you open the product, you are satisfied with it, and then you are actually handing the money.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the cultural side of it, that you have to understand that how the market actually behaves. Unless you understand that, you can't survive. You're not going to win if you are just blindly applying the international models to every single market.
Yeah, 100%. I think when you look at the world in a way that, for the way that it is, I think it's extremely powerful just because, you get the perspective of so many different, parts of the world, and you kind of, in a way, like piece the puzzle together. And I think it's actually very beautiful if you can see it. I think, um, when you're able to connect the dots, it's extremely, extremely magical and beautiful. It blows my mind sometimes when you see it. Yeah.
It does, definitely. So what are the plans for the India visit? I've been following the Slack channel and everybody is
Yeah.
talking about it, and I'm really
Yeah.
excited that that is going to happen. So have you chalked out
Yes.
any dates for it?
Yeah, we are planning something in San Francisco right now. I mean, while I'm here, but the one in India, I believe in Bangalore, and probably Bangalore would be the first one. We are going to have like sort of like a larger event scale type where we gather not just mentors but the friends of mentors or even mentees as well can come by. So it's going to be a huge one. It's going to be a huge sort of like event by itself. It's not even a meetup. I would say it's going to be an event of sorts. So just stay tuned and see. Yeah, there's no timeline, but I think we can expect it to be middle of this year, in June or July. It's going to be nice.
It can be a conference style arrangement where we can actually gather together, have some talks and speakers and all that. I would love to participate, and anything that happens, I will keep an eye out in the Slack group, and I'll get connected with the India reps, and hopefully that when those things happen, Galaxy would like to play a bigger role in the mix of things.
Yes, please. Let's do it.
Absolutely. So Felix, thank you very much for being a sport and joining us in the small talk that we wanted to have this conversation for you with. And I remember that you posted something on LinkedIn that your primary goal now is to start learning to say no to things, and that had me really worried that what happens if he just says I don't want to do it.
No, I mean, like I say, I think saying no is much more of like things like, oh, do you want to join this? Do you want to join like this company, or like do you want to work on this new thing? I think these are those things, but I'm always saying yes to giving forward. I'm always saying yes to giving back. I think this is what my dad has taught me. This is what I want to teach the world as well. And so for me, giving back to the community is always like a yes for me. So yeah, I'm glad to be here today.
And we are glad and absolutely delighted to have you as our guest. So with that, that comes to the conclusion of this episode. Thank you very much once again for joining us. And folks, stay tuned. In the short period of time each week, we are going to come back with another guest on this talk, which would be, they have very large shoes to fill in, because with great Mr. Felix Lee as our first guest, that is a very long path or road ahead where we are going to walk. So thank you and have a great day ahead. Bye.